Now, I haven't spoken much about this story, although it's a big news story. It's sort of been ongoing in the British press. Obviously, the recent news has been about the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, and COVID continues to be a major story. But it has been featured in international reports in the British press. I watched a little bit of coverage on CNN. I don't have access to Fox News, so I've seen snippets of this story here and there. Um, but there is some things that are worth mentioning. Now, like I say, this is an ongoing trial. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. Um, and it's not any trial. There's no escaping that fact. Did I mention I'm talking about Derek Chauvin and George Floyd? I don't know if I even mentioned that. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's not like any normal trial. I mean, it's coming amidst the backdrop of being the sort of cause celebre, for want of a better term, that ignited the whole race debate last year. And that was huge. After COVID, it was the event of the year, arguably. Um, well, West China tensions, I would also say, was a major geopolitical event. But this trial is going to be extremely important. It's unfortunate that there's such emotions involved because it means that people are going to be blind to reason. I mean, people observing him. So there will be those on the right who believe that, BLM has stoked the flames and that they're going to riot no matter what the outcome is. That there is going to be, the cultural wars are going to deepen, and they believe that the likes of Black Lives Matter has brought race relations back. I agree with them to an extent, but I do think the situation in America and Britain are a bit different. Um, but they will talk about black criminality. They will talk about Floyd's criminal background and all that. That's what they'll focus on. Now, on the other side, the left will focus on police brutality. They will focus on institutional racism, and they will focus on George Floyd being another example of, as they see it, black men being killed by white police. Of course, there are white victims of police brutality. There have been white people killed by the police in the United States, sometimes in quite similar conditions, but they get nowhere near the same attention. So that's interesting. Me personally, I'm trying not to look at the race issue in this case, and that's hard. But I think what matters is the facts. Now, like I say, I have not watched it extensively. I haven't sat down for hours and listened to testimony, so I don't know all the details. I don't. But there are two things that I think stand out. I'm going to say from the outset, my gut feeling is Chauvin was guilty of manslaughter. Murder, no, I don't think he went out to kill George Floyd. But my gut feeling, he is guilty of something equivalent to manslaughter. I don't know what the American term would be. In this country, it would be manslaughter. Um, why? Because he repeatedly ignored a dying man's pleas that he couldn't breathe. There's no getting away from that. There's no getting away from that, whatever side of the debate you're on. Um, and my own take is it's compatible to be very critical of Black Lives Matter, as I am, to be very critical of the way the left stokes up racial tensions. I believe they do. Very critical of the race baiting by powerful media networks like CNN. I believe they do. Um, all of that, but also feel that George Floyd's death was unjustified. Um, and I do think there is this knee-jerk attitude among too many on the right that if someone's wearing a uniform, they must always be in the right, no matter what. They won't even entertain the idea that police officers do sometimes abuse their power, particularly in the States. It happens occasionally here too. It happens. And I think there's this reluctance to admit that it happens. Um, so I'm going to just look at two interesting testimonies, which I think they're very important. Now, it has to be said these are testimonies for the prosecution against Derek Chauvin. And by the way, just before I continue, I think Derek Chauvin, No police officer in history has probably got as much attention as this guy, negative attention. Um, so there is a big question mark over. I think the trial is as fair as it can be. You know, the jury have been very carefully selected. They can't have any emotional connection to the case. Um, but you know, the whole country and much of the world knows about the case. So the selection process is very meticulous, and it has to be. This is the most high-profile trial since the O.J. Simpson trial, since the Michael Jackson trial. Certainly the biggest trial of recent years. Um, so with that in mind, it cannot turn into a media circus. There has to be a very strong degree of professionalism about how this is handled. And Derek Chauvin, whatever people think of him, he has a right to a fair trial. Um, my gut feeling is he went too far. My gut feeling is George Floyd would still be alive if he had listened to those pleas. Um, but he is entitled to a fair trial with all the evidence presented. Okay, so the two testimonies I'm thinking of are both very significant ones. Um, The police chief, I'm just reading out from the BBC report here. The police chief of Minneapolis has testified that ex-officer Derek Chauvin violated the agency's policy on force during the arrest of George Floyd. Important to point out that in America, different police forces have slightly different protocols. Some of them will be similar, but there are some differences force to force. Um, Chief Medaria Arredondo said the way Mr. Chauvin restrained Mr. Floyd was not in line with training and certainly not part of our ethics and our values. The chief fired Mr. Chauvin and the three other officers involved days after Mr. Floyd's death last May. Mr. Chauvin, who is on trial for murder, has denied the charges against him. Footage of Mr. Chauvin, who is white, kneeling on African American Mr. Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes last year, sparked global protests against racism. It also provoked a lot of looting and rioting, let's not forget. Monday marked the sixth day of Mr. Chauvin's trial, which is expected to last for at least 1 month. As police officers are rarely convicted or charged at all for deaths that occur in custody, the verdict in this trial will be seen as an indication of how the US legal system will treat such cases in future. I'll put a link to that, and you can see Arredondo testifying that after Floyd resisted arrest, in his view, um, Chauvin should have been listening to those pleas of discomfort, and he clearly wasn't. That's not verbatim, but that's what he was driving at. Now, this is a police officer. This is a senior police officer. And bear in mind, he's speaking under oath. So this wouldn't just be a case of, oh, he's trying to wash his hands of, this officer who's brought the force into disrepute. This is testimony under oath. So I think it matters. The other very significant thing, because a lot of those who are trying to make excuses for Chauvin are weighing heavily on the drug factor, the fact that George Floyd used fentanyl. So let's look at that. Um, okay, I'm not reading out these full reports for time reasons, but George Floyd died from lack of oxygen, not fentanyl, says expert. Contradicting the defense, Dr. Martin Tobin has said fentanyl did not cause Mr. Floyd's death. He said even a healthy person would have died. Mr. Chauvin, 45, is that's just repeating what's in the last report. Um, Try and get more specifically on the doctor here. Um, a toxicology report released last June said Mr. Floyd had the painkiller fentanyl and the drug methamphetamine in his system. Since then, the defence has argued that the fentanyl caused Mr. Floyd's loss of oxygen. However, Dr. Tobin, an intensive care doctor, this is his field, said that Mr. Floyd's breathing did not slow down enough for the painkiller to have been a factor in his total loss of oxygen. Forensic toxicologist Daniel Eichenschmidt, whose laboratory tested Mr. Floyd's blood and urine samples following his death, said there was evidence that some of the fentanyl had metabolized, meaning that an overdose was less likely. Defense also questioned Kentucky police surgeon Dr. Bill Smoke, an expert in forensic emergency medicine. Dr. Smoke said Mr. Floyd displayed air hunger, a term for when the body becomes desperate for oxygen. While a fentanyl overdose can slow down breathing, he said people who are overdosing are not aware that they are lacking oxygen and often appear sleepy. In contrast, he said Mr. Floyd appeared to be alert. And you can see that from the footage. Floyd was very alert. He was very panicked. He was clearly frightened. So this medical evidence would seem to weigh in favor of the prosecution. Um, I have no doubt that as this goes on, there will be police officers and doctors brought in on the side of the defence. So in the end, the judge has to. I'm often critical of judges, but this is one judge I don't envy. I don't know who the judge is, but they're going to have enormous weight on their shoulders because, like I say, this is not a normal trial. But it's going to rumble on. If Chauvin is found not guilty, or even if he's just charged with manslaughter, I do think there'll be a lot of anger and there might possibly be rioting and violence. And that's wrong. That won't achieve anything. Nevertheless, there cannot be a situation in America where time after time after time people die in police custody and the police constantly get exonerated. Um, One of the biggest things that has come out of this, leave aside the race issue just for a second. And again, I know that's hard, but let's leave that aside. It's the issue of police power in America. In America, I do feel that cops have far too much power. I think simply saying, accusing someone of resisting arrest can lead to that person's death sentence. Now, Floyd was unarmed. I just cannot see any rational way to justify Chauvin ignoring his pleas. What he should have done when Floyd was clearly saying he couldn't breathe, they should have put him into an upright position. Okay, arrest him for resisting arrest, or charge him for resisting arrest, charge him with the note fraud, but those are relatively minor offences. Um, my gut feeling is Chauvin went too far. And the history of the two men also speaks volumes. Chauvin clearly had personal animosity from character statements towards black guys. I mean, these are all things that cannot be ignored. And you see a sort of thing building up with it. But like I say, unfortunately, it is a very, very emotionally driven case. So both sides are going to. Well, I don't think if Chauvin is found guilty, I don't think you'll see conservatives rioting. That won't be the outcome. But I, I personally think that, and this is just my opinion, I'm no expert, but I think probably it most likely points to serious negligence and manslaughter, or whatever the American equivalent is. I don't think Chauvin murdered Floyd in the conventional sense, but he killed him, or rather, to put it more diplomatically, I think his refusal to accept Floyd's pleas were a major contributing factor. Now, pundits need to be very, very careful how they talk about this, um, because a powerful network like CNN, there has been occasions where they have just given factually incorrect information. I mentioned the case of Nick Sandman. It wasn't just CNN, it was other outlets who basically vilified that young man, and it turned out that there was more to it. I'm not saying that's the case here, but I don't know. I think if Chauvin is found guilty, and I might make another video when the verdict is announced, he'll need very significant protection inside. There's no doubt he'll be a target. High-profile police officer on inside a prison, it's going to be a target for other inmates. So, anyone taking pleasure from that, there's no winners in this. There really isn't. It's a very sad case all around. If Chauvin is found guilty, he should serve hard time, absolutely. But people need to just look at the facts and not try to take the emotions out of it. And I'll leave it there for now.